Hello everyone, I am Dr. Stuart Gray from the University of Bristol, and today I'd like to talk to you about Trove, towards a redesign for life, redesigning for reminiscence with looked after children. I need to give, first of all, a shout out to my team, who have done so much great work on this project, even before I came on board. So some names to drop: Chloe Meineck, Professor Debbie Watson, Professor Keir, Tom Metcalfe, Rachel Hahn, and Dr. Keir Williams. So to give you the preamble of what it is that we've created, so Trove, at the heart of this paper, is a physical and digital memory box for looked after and adopted children. We need to do some of the groundwork. We need to understand about concepts like life storying and the power of objects. Now in the UK, we have increasing numbers of looked after children. Looked after children can be classed as children who've spent anything more than 24 hours under the care of their local authority, and they may go on to live with foster parents in a residential home or in a residential school or secure unit of some kind. There's now 75,000, more than 75,000 looked after children in England, and that number continues to rise as the number of adoptions continues to fall. And this is leading to increased pressure on the system. Now, both looked after and adopted children, they face similar challenges, particularly around memory, thinking about their former lives. Do they remember birth parents, for example? Do they remember people in their lives before they went into care, before they were adopted? And also, how they build this understanding of who they are, their identity. They have to build it, sometimes when they're adopted from a young age or taken into care from a young age, from secondary sources, from information and artifacts collected by others. And these narratives don't always portray children accurately and can prohibit them from taking ownership from their past. Now in the UK we use a process called life story work to support these children develop narratives and engender them in reflection around their past lives. And it allows them to do it in a reassuring environment. Personal objects, they've been increasingly used as tools within these contexts because they present portals of memories, of places, of people. They're very, very powerful. And for looked after children and adopted children, they actually are even more powerful because sometimes they can embody their identity, what remains of their past, what remains of the connections with people, places, and memories that they can no longer see, they can no longer revisit. And so these objects, they're sometimes the only kind of constants that these children have got. They can assist with them when they adapt to change. They've got something familiar with them, grounding experience, but their loss can result in anxiety. It can be devastating. It can almost re-traumatize. It can result in grief. They grieve the object, they grieve what it represents, and the stories that they represent can begin to fade. The importance of identity and life story books. Well, developing a strong understanding of our past is important, as I said, because it underpins our identity. This kind of narrative identity consists of an evolving and internalized story, telling stories, retelling stories about who we are, about previous events that we've been involved in that have happened to us. It gives us this temporal understanding of our lives. If it's cohesive enough, it builds up us a picture of who we are, it gives us confidence. And for looked after and adopted children, it can sometimes be difficult for them to create this narrative. And as a result, it can leave them immensely frustrated. For these children, they have sometimes few enduring attachments and challenges in their lives. Not having this identity is problematic. And this is where life story work steps in to play a crucial role. It helps children to document these previous life events and for them to be sure about it. The life story work is most often supported using life story books, which are collated by looked after children's social workers. Often when they're submitted to care, they look and they talk to people who were previous care providers for the children. They collect objects and keepsakes that the children had, and they bring them together, and they have a book which kind of it charts that movement into care. And also throughout their care journey, it's something which they add to. People, places, things, they add that to the book as well. But the problem sometimes with the books is that they're very much translated through the eyes of the social worker and not necessarily from the perspective of the child. And sometimes it means that the ideas within it don't resonate with the child. They can't use it as a way to support their own identity because they don't really recognize the story which is portrayed. And so we need to incorporate other people's narratives, but we also need to make sure that it's the children's narratives that are at the heart of their life story work. The memory boxes, it's a lesser used method within life story work formally, but they recognise the immense power of objects. Now, in HCI, it's being used with older adults with dementia, for example, as one way to tap into really powerful early memories and to connect them with that identity that they've got. For looked after children, that having this temporal account of their lives, which is symbolised by an object, is important. It allows them to revisit previous moments of their lives, to reconstruct the narratives that they had around it, maybe to change their perspective or if additional information comes to light. And it's posed as a really an effective strategy for processing trauma. And that's something that a lot of these children have faced and need to overcome. And this led us to ask, how can a digital memory box support life story work for looked after and adopted children? So we developed our initial concept in 2014. Now this was Trove version 1, and it was a digital and physical memory box which allowed children to record stories about objects which had RFID tags on them and then replay the stories when placing them inside the box itself. It was a secure space to keep some small keepsakes as well. And we have previous publications about that, and there's limited time, so I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but we didn't get a chance to work with looked after and adopted children in the design of Trove itself. And this was because it formed part of an academic and business collaboration program in which children were spread over multiple projects, not all necessarily with looked after and adopted children at the heart of it. So it was a general children's project. But although we did evaluate Trove with looked after and adopted groups, we did wonder what it would be like had they been part of the initial design, if they'd been part of the process, if we'd undertaken a more participatory approach with those groups in particular. And so we embarked upon a redesign process in which we wanted to remake Trove based around children's experiences within those contexts. We wanted to begin by challenging some of the key assumptions that we'd made in the design of Trove version 1. First of all, we thought about audio. We'd only allowed children to record an audio, but there was nothing to say that they couldn't tell stories using other formats as well. And indeed, that's something which is done in therapeutic contexts. Sometimes it's hard to initially vocalize a story which is traumatic. So we wanted to think about what other ways we could facilitate storytelling. And then we thought also, within the very ephemeral environments that these children live in, like full of transients, how would they keep these objects? Sometimes they can be quite volatile places. How would they keep their objects so that they remain safe? And finally, the stories. How would they document the stories so they get this temporal approach and understanding to their identity? To do this, we undertook 3 60-minute workshops and an additional wrapping up session with 4 children from a therapeutic residential school. They were aged 11 to 13 years. And these kids, they represent some of the most vulnerable in the country. Quite frequently, they've experienced really quite severe trauma. They require individual support throughout all their activities that they undertake at the school, and many require help because they've got basic literacy issues, attention disorders, deficits, and problems sometimes with their emotional regulation. It was only really advisable and also responsible for us because some of the team, the frontline data collection members of the team, including myself, we'd never worked with children who had those challenges before. So it felt appropriate to work with some of the more mature children within that context. And so we had to undertake an extended ethics approach because of the sensitivities involved. In terms of our workshop methods, we had to strike a balance between granting children autonomy and equality with us as researchers, and also supporting their educational needs. So the sessions, they took place in a familiar, comfortable environment. We made sure that we had staff from the school on hand to support each individual child, and everyone at the table undertook the same activities. And to make sure that they were super engaged, we also really prioritised fun and engagement, role play and games as part of the process. The first workshop then, we asked our first research question: how do looked after children tell stories associated with their meaningful objects? First of all, myself and the other researcher involved, we brought in our own objects and told a story about those objects, why they were important to us, to try and break down that trust barrier. Then we asked the children to prototype an object from Lego and plasticine that they could use for the rest of the duration of the workshops, and then to tell a story about it using a media of their choice. And the children, they used a selection of different media to tell those stories, and some of the objects were actually based on objects that they owned. And for some of the more sensitive stories, they didn't always want to verbalise. One particular child who was involved was very ardent about writing the story down and letting people read the story, at least initially, until that trust was established. In the second workshop, we asked, how would children keep their objects? We undertook two different activities. We did a time machine role-playing game with wigs and beards to simulate them as their older selves, as they thought about how their keeping of objects would evolve over time. We also did Lego and plasticine prototyping. And the common insights that kind of came out of that was that object reminiscence was common around bedtimes, and they liked to be in a comfortable environment with soft materials to give them that feeling of security. And the meaningful objects themselves, sometimes it was better for them to be showcased, to be able to show off, to have a lot of attention on them. And other times they wanted to be able to have them discreet and concealed when they weren't sure of their security. And they also said that sometimes objects, they were designed to be used all the time, other times they were designed to maybe be used only once on a certain occasion, special occasion. Stories could have one story, stories could have many stories. They could be fact, they could be fiction, they could be a mixture of both. Our final workshop then, we looked at safety, and we did a questionnaire board game which was around securing secret information. It was an espionage game, and then we further ideated the prototypes from the previous session. So we found out from that process that concealing story content for children, they think that they can do it both physically and digitally. So to physically obscure someone from seeing some sensitive information is one thing, and to also do that digitally through passwords and encryption. Those were two ideas that were brought to the fore. So affording privacy and trust for these children, they believed, would help them develop more personally meaningful narratives. They would give up more information the more that they trusted in the methods for doing so. And this led us to develop Trove version 2 at the heart of the paper. And here's the new Trove. It's now more of a bag-based design in a box. It has a grey felt exterior that can be delicate and discreet in areas which are volatile, environments that are volatile. It can be quite easily obscured. But the inside opens up into this bright blue branded interior that gives the staging for storytelling. It's also got a cushion on the underside which allows children to lie down as they interact with Trove, perhaps in bed. There's a security hood, meanwhile, that folds over the top to encapsulate them as they tell their stories. And there's a handle on the underside which makes it far more portable than the previous design. Trove V2 retains the tangible connection between objects and stories at the core of its interaction. But there's now a touchscreen-based interface to control its functionality and to allow for the recording and playback of multimedia stories, including video, picture, audio, and written. It now uses NFC stickers on the objects of interest, which can link them with the stories, allowing for playback by placing them on a contact pad inside the bag itself. Following some of the ideas from the children in the workshops, we've now got enhanced security provisions. We've got an object-based passcode, which you can see in the top middle of those screenshots there, which allows for a child-friendly security protocol. Also, the stories are now sent to the cloud, where they are encrypted and password protected, only allowing for registered Trove users to access their own stories. I'd like to stop now and say thank you very much for listening, and if you'd like to find out more about Trove and how it has evolved from the workshop process into the product that you have seen in the pictures before you, please visit the paper and read more. Thank you very much.